So want to certainly welcome everybody here today. This is our final piece on LiDAR and utilizing LiDAR as a tool for climate adaptation. Today's presentation will be focused on climate change, climate adaptation, building resilience. What can you do as a community to work upon that? Hank will be working with us and showing you some examples and talking about it far better than I ever could, that's for sure. So we'll introduce Hank in a bit. Something I forgot to do in my last presentation to the north, but I got some remarkable staff here, and I couldn't do any of this without them. So I got Rebecca and Tammy, and that's kind of like a shout out. You don't see them right now, but they're in the office. They do amazing work, and they're the glue behind the scenes that keep everything moving. We want to do a little housekeeping before we get going. I want to ask that you keep your mics off. That if we have any questions, we're going to utilize and go over the questions at the very end. And then once we're completed the whole presentation, if anybody who would like to have a discussion, myself and Hank are going to stick around here for a while, and we can run the time clock for, as long as it needs. We want to make everybody happy. This kind of is a continuance from our first LiDAR presentation. We had 172 people that registered for that presentation. We had people all the way from Killarney Lake to the Paw to all the way down into Piney. And, it's really nice to see that interest and understanding, first of all, what LiDAR is, how you can utilize a tool, how it can benefit for your community. And we want to carry that even further as we have engaged Hank from Strategic Engineering to take a look at, the need of building climate resilience within your community and how can we get that done collectively together. So let's talk about where this all started for the Basin. And where it started for the Basin is that, I guess it would be the 97 flood. And, during that time, I think some of us who were around, you can call with Grand Forks basically on fire and all those things about Grand Forks burning to the ground and all that. And after the 97 flood, both sides of the border started collecting LiDAR. But on the US side, they finished collecting that in 2006. And they've done a lot of great work with that LiDAR, and Hank's going to hit up on a little bit of it. And they continue to do work, such as they are now working on the Fargo diversion. We're lucky here in Manitoba, we have the floodway diversion, but they are working on their diversion. They've been able to prioritize their projects. I can tell you that here in Manitoba, the Red River Basin was lucky enough to complete their LiDAR data collection last year. And it finally started getting released in 2021 because it had to be truthed. And that LiDAR data is now allowing a lot of our watersheds and other organizations that utilize that data to start moving things forward. So, and we're quite thrilled about that. If it wasn't for the partnerships of those watersheds or those conservation districts at the time, I don't know if we would have grabbed onto that, because they really made sure they made their voice heard that this is really important to them, and they wanted Red River Basin to play a role in trying to make that happen. We wanted to hit up on some news recently, and in the last while, you may recall in the last year, some of the ads that went up, like, in Manitoba, we saw extreme heat, we saw drought, and we saw a lot of fires. And you can see from this piece here that was put out that the news picked up on it. And, this ad here from CTV News Winnipeg, where it talks about 23 new wildfires reported in Manitoba last week. And that was just a weekend. And you can remember that a lot of the communities basically had to be evacuated, and they were out for some time. Manitoba Hydro, their telephone main pole lines were being burned up north. Down in the south, with all those fires going on, you can remember hearing about the drought and the concern about giving water support. Drought to our farm community and how it's affecting the agricultural section and what can be done about that. And again, here from this piece here, I believe this is also CTV News, and really the crop production toward the end of the year, because during the summer, I think this is one of the years that we've seen probably some of the most driest and hottest summers as far as the number of days in the summertime, where we're seeing over 30 degrees, and it's really we're seeing the effects of climate change, and it's these types of things that we need to build toward resilience on. So I wanted to hit up on this picture here. When I was the mayor of St. Clements in 2006, we ended up having a water spout come in off the lake, and it hit a tornado in Gull Lake. And the reason that I wanted this picture up is because, you know, sometimes things don't become a reality until it affects you directly. And from what we know at climate change and what we're going to hear, I mean, you've heard Hank speak on it. We're going to watch a video right away with Hank and Danny Blair, and they talk about how the weather patterns from the south are moving up further to the north. And these are one of the things they say we may start seeing more of: tornadoes, water funnels, and this sort of thing. And again, it's that climate change that's going to be bringing that forward to us. And then, of course, in the last few weeks, what we saw in British Columbia with the floods. And we often think, okay, well, that's just affecting them. You know, quite often I know that when we were dealing with flooding in Manitoba, that just affects them. Well, it doesn't, because here is a rail line, and you know from the washouts from the highways. And these are major transportation corridors which haul goods and services all the way over to us here in Manitoba. And without that, how does that product get here? So it begins to affect all of us. So it's important to build resilience as we go forward, and we need the right tools in order to do it. Here's another article which came up, which was from Nova Scotia, and they're also dealing with the same thing. And that's interesting to me, because that's my place I was born and raised when I was a young lad, and to see that affecting our communities from one end of the country to another is a really eye-opener, and it really speaks to the fact that we need to be better prepared. Now, before we get started with Hank's presentation, we have a short little video. A couple of years back, we worked alongside Native Planet and a few others. We helped them put a video in it. We're part of a video series. We just wanted to take a 6-minute clip out to show you this piece of what they were talking about way back then. I know Hank's going to look like quite a younger guy in this video, but he's just as brilliant now as he was then. So, but let's play this video, and we'll get back into our presentation. If you could, please, Rebecca.
Since the first steps of man, Native peoples have shared a spiritual connection with Mother Earth, a belief that sustains us, shapes our cultures, and gives us faith. My name is Simon Baker, and I've come to Winnipeg, the geographic center of North America, a city named after the world's 10th largest lake, and the Cree word meaning muddy waters. For thousands of years, Aboriginal peoples came to the forks of the Red and Assiniboine rivers to meet and trade. But now these waters are shaping the future of the Canadian prairies and the fate of this region's most important lake. Native Planet takes me to Winnipeg, where scientists, government, and business leaders have come together to share their concerns about climate change.
I'm one of the directors at the Prairie Climate Center, which is the new collaboration between the University of Winnipeg and the International Institute for Sustainable Development. So it's a collaboration between researchers, scientific, and policy to help this part of the world adapt to climate change. We've got over a century of drainage. That's what Europeans did when they encountered this landscape, was bisect it and drain it for settled agriculture. The challenge is renaturalizing this heavily modified landscape. Central North America, the Great Plains, what we see happening is more extreme floods and drought episodes. So the increased heat associated with global warming is amplifying the hydrologic cycle, which means there's more evaporation, there's more rainfall, everything's moving faster in the atmosphere. When it rains more intensely. When it's dry, it's more intensely dry. That's the main challenge of climate adaptation on the Canadian prairies.
Based out of the University of Winnipeg, the Prairie Climate Center is researching and mapping the future of climate on the Canadian prairies.
Sadie, how are you? Good to see you.
To see how climate is projected to impact Lake Winnipeg, I've come to meet Aboriginal student leaders, Sadie Phoenix and Kevin Setti, who are taking me inside the Climate Center.
We're anxious to show you some of the results from our climate change atlas. There's some very provocative things in the atlas that we think everybody should see, everybody should know about. One of the really shocking things that the atlas shows us is how hot it's going to be in the prairies. in the coming years. In the atlas, we use 3 time periods: the recent 30 years, essentially the next 30 years, and the 30 years after that. So progression. And we use 2 carbon scenarios. What if we continue to pump carbon dioxide in the atmosphere the way we are right now? What if we reduce it as per the Paris Agreement? For example, for Winnipeg, we get about 12 days per year of plus 30. So those nice hot summer days. In an average year, we get about 12. If we go to the next 30-year period, in the high carbon scenario, Winnipeg has about double the number of 30-degree days in the next 30-year period. And if we continue on the business as usual track with the carbon dioxide, in 2051, 2080, when our current young people are getting older, we're looking at 46 days in an average year in that 30-year period of plus 30. That's a crazy amount of change in our summer climate. If we continue on the current track of climate change, lake environments, forested environments, culture, recreation, farming, urban lifestyles, it changes basically everything. And one of the things that will change is Lake Winnipeg. Lake Winnipeg will be a lot warmer in the future. A lot more heat and less precipitation means drought. And drought is not a good thing in this part of the world. It's expensive, has all kinds of impacts, health issues.
As us individuals, what can we do today to prevent this?
The bottom line is that everybody, and collectively, certainly, we have to lower our emissions. It starts at home, but also change has to happen collectively. Nobody's expected to do it on their own. No community is expected to do it on its own. We have to do it together.
That's great.
That's all that you're right. I want to say it's going to be okay, but there's some work to be done.
Just thinking about how the land is going to be having drastically changed with drought and the impacts it's going to have on water, and our access to water is a huge thing.
Water is behind all of this. Water is a very important commodity in the climate realm and the cultural realm. So we need to get ready for that. But we need to reflect upon change in your lifestyle, change in your expectations, change in the kinds of energy and the amount of energy that you use.
Thank you for bringing me in, showing me this information. It's an eye-opener for sure. You can have the scientists go out and tell everybody and show everybody, but it's us that have to bring it to the forefront and show, this program that you have here is amazing.
This starts to give managers, government officials an opportunity to think about it and plan for this future. So you can see the federal government saying we need to take traditional knowledge seriously in these climate change debates. And that's because they've been on the front lines of it. They're seeing it. But there's also a thing there that Western science and Western society doesn't have, which is a way of life and a way of understanding relationships with nature that we desperately need for the future.
The thing that scares me as a climatologist is how rapidly the climate is changing. The science says it's coming. It's here. The climate system is an amazingly complex entity. There'll be some surprising changes in the near future that we're not really ready for. We have maybe a couple of decades at most to really make some significant change in the amount of carbon dioxide that we add to the atmosphere. We're so far behind in that regard, so it worries me that we're not going to do it. Some people say 10 years, some people say 20 years, some people say 50 years, but somewhere in there is a point where we don't want to go past some point where really undesirable things happen around the world.
So what I want to say is whether you call it climate resilience or climate adaptation, it's all the same. And when you saw that video, when you heard Hank talk and Danny Blair talk, it's a reality. It's happening here. It's happening now. You're seeing those long periods of hot, dry days in the summertime. We're in a drought. This is becoming a reality, and it is up to all of us to work together in order to make that change. And so what I want to say is, before I go much further, it's been great for us because we had the opportunity to partner with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We partnered with the City of Winnipeg and the town of Morris in order to do the climate data collection. We were able to work with our watersheds in order to assist us, to help us get funding put into place. And if it wasn't for all of these people, including the province of Manitoba, I'm doubtful that we would have got to this stage. The presentation you're about to see from Hank, you know, the climate adaptation plans is at a much higher level. And we really count on our watersheds and our communities to collectively work together for all groups in order to do a more defined and detailed plan. We're very lucky because we have great watershed leaders in our basin, and I think it's because of that it gives me hope we're going to continue to work things through. So with that, I don't want to take too much more of your time. I'm going to hand it over to Hank. Hank, thank you so much for coming back in today, and I'm going to hand it over to you to get started.
Well, thank you very much, Steve and Rebecca, and thanks for inviting me to do this work for you.
And
Pardon?
And Tammy, we want you're on a roll. Don't forget Tammy.
And Tammy, yeah, sorry. So I'm just going to start right in. You saw the screenshot, harnessing the power of LiDAR for climate adaptation. So the question is, what is climate adaptation? What are these impacts to which we're adapting? And I'll spoiler alert, it's changes in temperature and precipitation primarily, changes in the relative frequency of floods and droughts, changes in Red River Basin flow patterns. And I'm going to tip my hand a little bit and talk about a specific adaptation priority here, which is multifunctional storage, also known as natural infrastructure, because it gives us both that flood and drought protection primarily and other environmental benefits. And then we'll talk about how LiDAR can assist. So then we'll talk a little bit about a South Red River Basin case study in one of the areas where there's recent high quality LiDAR. What is climate adaptation? It is mitigating climate risk. It is not by convention reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's an important topic, as Danny Blair alluded to, is kind of feeling nostalgic seeing that documentary from 5 years ago. Happy to be doing what we're doing now, which is actually helping communities adapt. Okay, so we're not talking about greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We're talking about building resilience to climate change, which is essentially the same thing as adaptation for all intents and purposes. So what are our key climate change impacts? And I thought, you know what, I'm going to refer to very recent federal government work on the topic. We're actually the first chapter of this multi-chapter report, regional perspectives on climate change. And I'm going to blow this up a little bit. This is what the government of Canada says officially about the prairies. The prairies in Western Canada generally have had the strongest warming to date across southern Canada, especially in winter. Further warming is projected, resulting in longer growing seasons, earlier spring peak stream flow, increasingly severe heat waves, and increased wildfire risk. More frequent and intense droughts are anticipated across southern prairies in summer. While more precipitation is expected generally, summer rainfall may change little. More intense rainfalls are also projected. So obviously everyone should be concerned when they read this. I was consoled in that our analysis is 100% consistent with this, and we take it a step further to say, okay, so what do we do about it, and how can LiDAR help us adapt better and faster? Okay. Another key point made in this federal report is on collaborative water management. Collaboration is needed among all levels of government, stakeholders such as watershed stewardship groups, rural municipalities, conservation districts, to implement, adaptation measures and promote practices that prevent or minimize adverse effects of water excesses and shortages. So that's the key thing. We're going to have droughts, we're going to have floods, and we have to work together because no dot on the map can fix it alone. We have to work together. Okay. So that's all well and good, but why should I believe all of this? Why should I believe any of this? And the answer is it's grounded in very good science. And we have going on 50 years of very good science on global climate models. And since the first ones came available in 1970 or so, they've been accurate at predicting future warming. It's an anecdote. I actually worked in a commercial greenhouse, and there is a reason it's called the greenhouse effect, or arguably hothouse effect. Hot houses, greenhouses, I've worked in them, I know how hot they get. Shout out to the work of the Prairie Climate Center and the Prairie Climate Atlas, which was just seen in that documentary. So reiterating the point, future climate, very large number of days above 30 degrees C. And we're already seeing that since this map was created in 14 or 15, we've seen an increase in the number of hot days every summer. Precipitation, different story, more variable, more mixed, not as much agreement amongst the models. Maybe it doesn't change that much. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. It's not as strong a signal, but we still can anticipate what's going to happen. And the key messages are all the models agree that we'll be much hotter. There's slight differences in the rate of increase in temperature, but they basically all agree. Most models say we'll get a little more precipitation in this region, but not all. But heat dominates. We're moving into a world where we'll have thirstier crops, thirstier soils, and a thirstier atmosphere. So precipitation will generate less runoff on average. You get a big rainfall event, but where did the runoff go? Well, it disappeared into the cracks in the ground and back to the atmosphere. So that's the kind of world we're moving towards. So just to put this in context, we did some work with the global climate models and projected what's called the Standardized Precipitation and Evaporation Index, SPEI. This is a little time shot from 1950 to 1980. You see there's the 50s were drought. Remember that, 50s were droughty, early 60s, and then through the 70s it was wetter. Okay, so that's interesting. You extend the record a little further out, those droughts in the 50s are starting to look, well, not quite as impressive compared to the droughts of the 80s. Extend this out a little further to the current, and you already start to see that there was droughts in this era that rivaled those of the 50s and the 80s. You go further, now we're going into the climate projections. We're getting up to 2030, and we're integrating the influence of the climate projections, and we see that droughts of the past start to look modest compared to the droughts of the future. And the further you go out, 2035, 2050, 2080, you see the trend, and you see that what was a significant drought of past decades will be dwarfed by the droughts of the future. The important thing here is, though, even out in 2070, when we have these frequent exposure to drought conditions, there are periods of excess moisture. There will be rainy days, months, years in the future. They will occur. They will be important as resource harvesting opportunities. We'll get a little more into that shortly. I just want to give a few slides on some work that we'll be presenting in greater detail at the Redwood Basin Conference next month, modeling the joint effect of temperature and precipitation changes in Red River Basin hydrology. And we're very fortunate to take advantage of the Global Water Futures Program. We used a standard U.S. Army Corps of Engineer hydrologic model. You don't see a line of the 49th parallel. We're very happy about this work because we believe it's the first time that a seamless international model of the Red River Basin has been constructed. And we can basically push this hydrologic model with climate change data. So we've extracted from the global climate models the precipitation changes for the Red River Basin. And here you see that earlier point. Those gray lines, some are above the red, some are below it. Some of the models say more precip, some say less. Most models say more. Where there's 100% agreement is all the models say warmer, much, much warmer. So you push that through the hydrologic model and a few key things come out. Less snowpack, therefore spring melts are earlier with a lower spring flood peak on average. Usually, most models are projecting lower runoff volume overall, but this risk of high rainfall events, extreme rainfall events, midsummer, high flows, that exists. There will be those events in the future. The flood peak on the Red River may change to a kind of a highly variable flash flooding peak rather than the traditional spring flood peak. That may happen. We are expected to see less water overall with significant seasonality changes. More water in the winter and the fall, but less in spring and summer. And of course, this is not great news for agriculture or for municipal water supply for that matter. So if these are the impacts, what are our adaptation priorities? And I'll pause here. I know we're not doing a fully interactive discussion here, so I'll just let that sit. And then when I give you my priority, I hope it won't come as a shock. So if you twisted my arm, I would say the foremost adaptation priority is multifunctional storage via national infrastructure. I think it is the best, most useful, most high value thing we can do, and at all kinds of different scales. But what is this? You've heard the term, there's multiple definitions. This is the one I like. Existing restored or enhanced combinations of vegetation and associated biology, land and water, naturally occurring ecological processes that generate infrastructure outcomes. So here's the big idea. We're letting Mother Nature do some of the heavy lifting. We help it along with some engineering, that's all good. The point is that by kind of collaborating with Mother Nature, we get better outcomes than we could if we had a pure engineering solution. Because of its multifunctionality, preventing and mitigating floods, erosion, and landslides, mitigating effects of extreme heat and purifying groundwater, can be natural features or human-made and constructed, or hybrids. Key point, natural infrastructure stacks multiple benefits, typically has a high return on investment. We worked on projects for clients where we're routinely getting benefit cost ratios above 4 and recently above 8 when we stack up all those benefits. And this, if you're planning on accessing federal money from Infrastructure Canada, they need a benefit cost ratio above 2. They will let you count these environmental co-benefits. Very important. Bottom line, if you have natural infrastructure, keep it. If you need it, build it. And just a reference that I quite like on this subject, this was work commissioned by the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment in 2018. Best practices and resources on climate resilient natural infrastructure. Great report. Also speaks to Indigenous worldview on natural infrastructure, which is quite an interesting section of the report. Okay, back to flood risk and drought risk. So we have both. Typically, although this may change, flood risk occurs in the spring, usually. Drought risk occurs in the summer. And then the loss of this stuff, natural infrastructure, increases both flood and drought risk. However, investments in natural infrastructure reduce both risks. And let's talk a little bit more about what this is. So, natural infrastructure examples. This is small scale stuff done by municipalities, watershed districts, clients of ours. We're helping with engineering sort of alternatives, different styles of storage, managed storage, but basically it's a small scale stuff, field level stuff, backflooding a section perhaps, engineering a wetland, controls on a culvert. This is what we're talking about at the small scale. Medium scale, we're talking larger projects. Every chance I get, I talk about Pelly's Lake because I think it's a great project, and it was celebrated again at the Watersheds Conference last weekend in Brandon. Roy Wood got an award, a Lifetime Achievement Award for his leadership on this project in the Redwood Watershed District. I do love the project. I was involved a little bit, and it does combine all these things, groundwater infiltration, flood control. In this case, also, importantly, water quality improvement by capturing and removing phosphorus. Great project. I've done the numbers on this one. This has a benefit cost ratio at least 4. At least 4. It's one of those that we just don't have solid numbers on all the benefits, but it's probably one of those that gets up to around 8 or 10. This is a variant of that concept, bioretention treatment wetland, constructed in actually western Manitoba, where we're combining some of those functions. We've got a water resource for irrigation, got some infiltration happening. We've got nutrient management. We've got crops extracting phosphorus for us. Another example, same concept, different location. We're harvesting those the nutrients, the phosphorus primarily, the energy as biomass, and the carbon content. So we're stacking up all those benefits by managing these systems, which is a bigger picture. One of my favorite projects actually comes from the States, North Ottawa Project, Minnesota. Redwood Basin Commission actually toured me around this project some years ago now, but I love it. I wish I'd been part of the design team. I think it's an excellent project. 3 square miles of multifunctional storage. And this is what it looks like from the air. Well, you're integrating, you see on the one cell, water, cattails, we're absorbing nutrients and gonna harvest those nutrients. You got some wetland areas for habitat, and you've actually got, in most years, you can get a crop off it. So it's multifunctional. It's a shock absorber, takes the flood shock and turns it into multiple benefits and reduces drought risk. Great project. Larger scale national infrastructure project has not been constructed yet. I hope it does get built. It's the Treehorn Reservoir. Diversion from the Assiniboine River into Treehorn, where there's good storage available. It recharges the Boyne River, Stephenfield Reservoir, and the Pembina Valley Water Co-op. Some would argue it's conventional civil engineering. I argue it is natural infrastructure because of all of the aquatic ecosystem benefits all the way downstream. The drought protection of the Boyne River. We improve the water quality in Stephenfield, which is a recreational asset, provincial park, swimming, fishing, you name it, boating. We've got much improved water quality downstream of Stephenfield as well. So I call this natural infrastructure. I think it does require a lot of engineering, but the environmental outcomes are so positive. Let's call it natural infrastructure. Excuse me. So why is LiDAR important? Long story short, it accelerates natural infrastructure systems design from field to basin scale. And I want to give you a few examples of that. So essentially, having access to this free, very high quality data asset builds a culture of water harvesting, which is what we need for climate adaptation. No ifs, ands, or buts. It's what we will need to do. And this is not a new story. PFRA did this, 70, 80 years ago. There was a 60, Stephenfield, Lake Minnewaska, in Morden, Shellmouth Reservoir. Those were all PFRA storage projects, multifunctional storage projects at different scales and necessary as we were climbing out of the hole we were in the Dust Bowl and those droughts of the 50s as well. So it's not new, we're just rediscovering. So we are celebrating the complete coverage of LiDAR data for the Red River Basin. And LiDAR, if it's new to you, it's a very impressive modern technology of acquiring very detailed elevation data. You shoot a laser beam from an aircraft, and based on the time of the return signal and the location of the aircraft, you can deduce how high the aircraft is above the ground and therefore the absolute elevation of the ground. And you've got this information every square meter. It's phenomenal data resource. You can do amazing things with this, and I hope to show you a few examples. That yellow area, we're going to focus down on that yellow area where some of the most recent and highest quality LiDAR has been acquired in Manitoba. Primarily the western 2/3, I'm going to say, of the Pembina Valley Watershed District. So just sort of field scale example of LiDAR use for reducing erosion. We all know what erosion is. When those heavy rains come with climate change, and they will be heavy, we don't want this. We want to retain that soil and nutrients, and there's ways to do it. And LiDAR can identify the risk zones and, as importantly, the contours where we can do some simple earthworks and build bunds on those contours and intercept water and nutrients before they run off our fields. And again, this is not a new idea. It was done by the USDA. Their version of PFRA was called NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. Their version of PFRA as their Dust Bowl rehabilitation strategy in the US in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and still great technology, much easier to do with LiDAR, accelerates workflows, designs, cost, those return on investment calculations. And it's a great technology that I think we'll need here in Canada. Just shout out to Ag Canada Living Labs. They allowed us to do this work, and we hope to see more of it in the next phase of Living Labs. So shout out to Agriculture Canada. Just another example of municipal scale culvert sizing with LiDAR. This is just a culvert. I won't get into the details, but we know its location with great accuracy. We also know its drainage, its catchment area with great accuracy, and just an interesting feature of this site. 20-year design flow, say 2.35 CMS, 83 CFS. But when we did the LiDAR analysis, we detected that, in fact, for the 1 in 50-year flow, the catchment area is larger. So the 1 in 50-year design flow, because it's got more rain across a larger area, it's not that much more rain, but we've got a larger contributing area due to ponding, which we could only see with the LiDAR. We got a design flow that's more than 2 times what the 1 in 20 year is. This is a big jump for the 1 in 50 year. And unfortunately, those 1 in 50 years are coming too frequently now. When it does rain, it pours, as you've all seen. Just another example of how to use the LiDAR for flood risk mapping that's conformant with the federal guidelines. So this branch of Natural Resources Canada, Public Safety Canada, it's a branch of NRCan, released this guidance document in March of this year, and it states an expectation of a 1 meter geometric standard. So the federal government is expecting, wishing, hoping, praying that its clients can produce flood mapping at a 1 meter resolution. That's not possible in many places in the country, but in southern Manitoba, thanks to the work of the province of Manitoba and the Red River Basin Commission, we do have 1 meter LiDAR. We can be conformant with federal guidelines, and we can attract more federal dollars as a result of that level of conformance. So just an idea here that infrastructure buildings, for example, are exposed to greater damage as a function of flood depth. And the LiDAR allows us an accurate determination of that depth of flooding. So when we do this, this flood risk mapping, we're mapping every road segment, every tax parcel, every building, and we're estimating the damages. Is it perfect? Is it 6 decimal places of accuracy? No, but it is conformant with the federal guidelines on how to do this analysis. So you have consistent benchmarks for comparison, for example, putting a dollar value on the benefit of flood protection. Just an example of what we've done some processing in our shop where we've got damage functions for every building. And this is actually part of downtown Winnipeg. You can do it anywhere. This is a typical rural section. We use the damage functions for agricultural. And we know the costs of flooding in this section. Okay, moving on a little bit. Watershed scale example, natural infrastructure site identification. I won't say too much about the particular case study, but it's in southern Manitoba. Here we're using, jumping ahead here, man. Just hold your horses. Okay, so this is how we're evaluating alternative reservoir locations. So we've got an earthworks model, sort of a standard PFRA cross-section of an earth dam, and we extrude it through the digital elevation model from the LiDAR. And then we can find out the spots where we can move the minimum amount of earth for the maximum storage. I'm sorry, it's jumping around. That's the key idea here. The LiDAR gives us, without having to do expensive field survey, we can get the best locations, the minimum amount of earth to move for the most amount of storage. Now, I'm going to jump into a South Basin case study, work we're doing with the Pembina Valley Watershed District. Down this yellow area here, we're actually going to subset that a little bit. We're going to go into the extreme southwest, and we're going to look at some LiDAR-based work we're doing for national infrastructure site identification. Just a little more detail here. What the LiDAR does is it adds a huge amount of detail to flow path identification. That's one of the things, in fact, also allows us to estimate the phosphorus that's exported from these watersheds. But what it does is it gives us this very accurate stream flow delineation. And what we're also able to do is get a very accurate estimation of the upstream drainage area at every location in these drainage networks, in these stream flow networks. And what that allows us to do is plan out whole networks of distributed retention storage projects. You see where we figured these sites, where these sites make sense for this particular region. And then on the left side or the right side of the screen, you see some visualizations of those sites. So now you got a good idea of where there's efficient location, how to move the minimum amount of earth to get the maximum amount of storage, and how to start communicating these with landowners and other stakeholders as to, if we build it here, what are the implications? So the LiDAR and the associated visualization tools give you very quick access to alternatives. If some landowner says, there's no way we're building at site 7, okay, drop site 7 and use some other sites nearby or reevaluate away from his property. With the LiDAR, you can do all this analysis rapidly, come up with alternative scenarios rapidly. Great resource. So the key message here is that LiDAR gives us the right tool, not the only tool, but a very good tool for designing national infrastructure networks efficiently. They are needed for climate adaptation. And what I would say is, going back to the beginning and that key message from the feds about collaboration. I have some, having worked now, 20 years back in Manitoba and worked at all levels of government, from federal level to rural municipality level, this much is true. They got this right. Collaboration is needed. No level of government can solve this stuff on its own. Province has done us a solid here. They've done us a solid in providing all this LiDAR, tens of millions of dollars of investment in this LiDAR that they made freely available. Hats off to the province of Manitoba for the foresight to collect this data, make it publicly available so we can use it, we can extract value from it, we can bring it to our partners and clients and get work done, get good projects built faster, quicker, cheaper, better. So the federal message on this is right. No one can get this done by themselves in their box, however big their box is. It needs collaboration. And I just want to say that, this report, this federal report is pretty high level too, but it does understand this point that we're dealing with occasionally water surplus, excess flooding, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm not the only one. The risk of water shortage, that is in some ways the deeper risk, the deeper risk we have to plan for. We know a fair bit about flooding and have got a lot of good protection in place. Now it's about harvesting those flood waters for those times of drought. That's the key message going forward. So there are my contacts. Shout out to the Redwood Basin Commission for giving us the opportunity to do this work and collaborate with them. And I think that the commission is this absolutely key connector across the border. We've learned so much from what's going on in the States, including the acquisition of LiDAR itself, and the partnerships between watershed districts and RMs in southern Manitoba. We have so benefited from the connecting role of the commission. I just want to make sure that everyone appreciates that, and frankly, Steve's tenacity at pulling this off. So I'm leaving it at that for now.
Thanks a lot, Hank. It wasn't, we'll take some credit for the River Basin, but it is partnership. It's about us all working together in order to make a difference. And We couldn't do it without, you know, my people in my office, the people in the watershed office, people like yourself. You know, think about the climate news pieces that I presented just a little while ago. Give consideration to what's happened in the past. So think about what's happened here in Manitoba last year and what's going on in other places over the last couple of weeks with BC and in Nova Scotia. We can't have that mindset anymore that you think it's not going to happen to us. Something's going to happen. You know, it's just, when is it going to happen? Our First Nations friends talk about the fact that water's life. Well, gosh darn, if we hit 40 some days of summer where it's above 30, we're going to be crying out for water pretty bad. And you know, we need water to be, you know, for potable water. We need it for our crops. We need it for our livestock. You know, climate change is just going to force us to change our traditional ways of life. The way we're dealing with things now are not going to be the way we're going to be dealing with things in the future. And I think, again, we're so lucky to have great organizations that are working alongside each other in order to carry this message forward. The presentation today is certainly high level. When we complete the climate adaptation plan itself, it will be presented, and Rebecca is going to be sending us some links later on to allow you the opportunity to go on and maybe share them with other people who weren't able to be here today, because we've had many folks that registered. Some of them are planning on coming back on and watching the videos later, but they're always going to be there, whether it's the LiDAR videos that we worked on earlier, the manual, this section on climate change, the need of resilience, the climate adaptation plans, which we're going to be handing in. The bottom line is that we all have to work on creating adaptation resilience collectively together. And as municipalities, councils, I don't need to explain it to watersheds, as I said, because they all get it. It's important for you to understand what the future may bring here, because if we're not prepared, we're not doing our job. That's the bottom line. And it is the thought of the Basin that, you know, as we prepare these climate adaptation plans, that these plans need to be attached somewhat into your emergency plan, because some of these worst case scenarios that we're seeing really need to be considered, that they could happen here, like BC, when we're talking about that atmospheric river. I think I got it right that time, Hank?
Yep, atmospheric river.
And that could happen here, where you see such an abundant amount of rainfall all come down really quick. And what's going to happen to it is going to hit the wall, hit the fields, hit the drains, and it's gone. And we're going to lose these opportunities. Going forward, we want to continue to work with everybody. We want to be clear on the fact that we need to complete these plans, and we need to be able to have you all to participate and carry that forward by creating your own plans and utilizing for that. I think that's pretty well about it for me here, Hank. I'd like to open up the floor for some conversation, but I see a few people in here, and one of them, if Cliff is still here, if anybody, and I know you understand the importance of what we're doing here collectively under this partnership, and maybe you can speak to some of that. Talk a little bit about what you guys are doing. Talk about the importance of what we've done collectively together with, you know, obtaining the data and now you starting to utilize it. Can you do that for us?
Yeah, sure. I think, you know, we rely on our board. We've got 40 boots on the ground out there that are looking for projects, and, you know, the LiDAR, the modeling, the science just helps a lot. It helps direct the conversation. It helps really focus and ensure that the municipalities are getting bang for the buck. So yeah, keep up the good work. It's great stuff.
Yeah, and it's not only the work we're doing, it's the stuff that you guys are doing as well. I mean, we've taken this lead from folks like yourself and Justin and Jody, and, you know, we've carried it forward. You know, I want to, you know, you speak to the importance of this, and I know it's easy for you to understand, but when you're meeting with your municipalities that sit on your board, I know the guys that probably sit as your board members get it, but, you know, are there times, you know, is the feeling that is all the councils getting this? Do we need to work harder on that part, on the education?
Well, it'd be interesting to see if you polled all our municipal members on climate change and the impacts and what they're expecting to see in the future. I think there's still some question about that amongst our membership.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, Cliff, and thank you for your insight. We don't have a lot of people on today. We're supposed to have over 40 here, but I don't know if anybody had any questions. If you want to just pop on put your mic on, pop on up your picture, and we can create some dialogue here if somebody wants to step in.
If I'm not shy about putting people on the spot. I see Ralph Groening on the call as well. And Ralph, would you be able to provide a kind of just any commentary on this? We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Hank and Steve. It's a great presentation, and we certainly accept, our municipality does, and I think perhaps to the need for collaboration. And I was thinking during your presentation about how we have failed to find ways in which we can further collaborate with communities. And I say that specifically to and about those of us who have not yet joined forces with the watershed districts. And I think, Hank, you offered at least part of the answer to why that so far hasn't happened and why we haven't had the collaboration. So those are my points, and I do see opportunity with the kind of work that you've done. Thank you. I'm happy to contribute. I know it requires further discussion. We don't have time for that now, but thanks for the opportunity, Hank and Steve, for contributing.
It's always great to hear from you, Ralph. You've got experience and perspective and wisdom, and I mean, your recommendations, suggestions, maybe some brainstorming at some point. I look forward to it, Ralph. We look forward to it. So thanks for participating.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to make comments, and I know discussions with Cliff and with you, Hank, and with other partners to further the importance of that collaborative effort that you offered.
Thanks, Ralph. I know it's a lot of information to take in at the first time, and if you're not really up to speed on climate change, resilience, adaptation, I getting feedback. One of my best feedback people is my wife, who's a counselor for St. Clements, and whoa, she said, that's kind of like over my head. But I think the responsibility of people that are in the municipal business and municipal world to understand what this is all about, so that when you have your administration coming to talk to you, or maybe perhaps people like Cliff through the watersheds, that you have an understanding of the LiDAR product and about what it can do and how it can do that as far as delivering like a confirmation or a proof that there's need of building this type of resilience, maybe through water retention or whatever the suggestion is. So really encourage you to continue to work hard and try to gain that knowledge as much as possible. Hi, Ken.
Hey, folks. I've just got a quick thought here on the same topic. Some of our council, most of them are farmers, and most of them see climate change, but they don't necessarily say it's happening. And yet, attendance at this event might be a reflection of that, because I think a lot of them feel fairly overwhelmed when you start talking about climate change, and it feels like a no-win situation. But I look at our area and I think, to do all these things, I don't need to think about 30 years from now to say it's a good idea. I can talk about what's happening today and what's happened in the last 50 to 70 years and say, this is what this looks like in the current situation. And it's still a good idea, and it's still easily justifiable when you talk about water retention and flood protection. So yeah, maybe we're pushing too hard. And maybe we're not letting people focus on today, and maybe we're scaring people off a little bit on. It's human nature. We're all scared of the unknown, right? So that's my thoughts for today, and I applaud all your work regardless.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Ken, this is the Ken that I just met in Brandon, I believe, eh?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Ken. Well, you have very good points. And it is maybe perhaps, maybe informative for Connie as well. Not everyone has to hear the project rationale the same way. The funders do need to, usually the funders need to hear that it's, you're taking the future into account, and there's a logic and science and good engineering, good analysis. The funders need to know that, but not every project has to be justified with elaborate climate science. It can just be for Farmer Smith. It can just be a very good project that'll help his productivity. So we're just dealing with the reality of what, and I think it won't change. If you want investment, if you want funding, you have to be somewhat conversant with this language. Does everyone need to hear it that same way? Probably not.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I know, going to go back to you, Ralph, but when you were sitting with the AMM there and stuff, you're heading off to the FCM. You're talking to all the high official folks there, and you've been hearing that same message now for numerous years.
Well, I do want to make a comment on some of the discussion we've had at FCM board level, and as well, this is an important consideration. I think sometimes we spend too much time trying to argue the case rather than offering solutions, which is what I mentioned, Hank. The solutions that you're offering, that's what will begin, I think, to nudge people over. And I think asset management and the natural landscape, there's a lot of opportunities. Just occasionally let's set the discussion aside where we're trying to convince people, and let's find innovative ways, such as what has been offered here today. Find innovative ways to incorporate some of these ideas into urban centers, but also into the farm community. So that would be my follow-up question to what's happening in Ottawa and what our federal organization is doing. And there are opportunities there, absolutely. Take a look at asset management, absolutely, and incorporating some of this into that. Thanks.
Good points, Ralph. Thank you.
Hey, Steve, could I say a few words for our good
farmers? Go ahead, Walter. Please do.
I'm kind of a retired one, but a lot of our farmers are way ahead of us. They're using seeding methods now we never heard of, and they've doubled their yields per acre on their crops. And they're using fertilizer very, very wisely now. They monitor when they combine where they need the fertilizer for seeding next year. I don't think a lot of us realize actually what the farmers have accomplished. And we do realize they're really worried about this drought. That's our number one problem, nothing but flooding and all these. Like a big flood, it comes and goes really fast, but a drought hangs on and causes a lot of stress. I think we should give the farmers a real big, kind of like a big bouquet of what they're actually doing out there. And they realize irrigation would be a great thing, but we can't all have it. But a lot of them are trying. They're trying little looks, and we're on the Red Boy watershed district, I guess you call it now. And it's amazing how many are taking advantage of this GROW program for retention and a little bit of irrigation. And it's really, really interesting to get talking to some of these young farmers. They even speak a different language than I do. Like they can do a half section in a day. Well, we used to take maybe 40 acres in a day, and then we got it up to 80. And our average was 40 in wheat or something at the very highest. Now they're crying if they get a 40 bushel acre crop. Their normal yields are way up there. So mind you, oats are $9 a bushel, and flax is been there 40, and canola is 20. We've never heard tell of that stuff. But
wow, I didn't realize it was that high. It's amazing.
Yeah. And the price of, you got to look at the price of chemicals have gone up 30% in the fall now. Price of lumber, what's it done? It's everything's just going crazy right now. They don't really know what to do, and they hate to stick their neck out too much. That's
right.
There's a lot of uncertainties out there. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. You guys are doing a good job, but keep pushing it too. Like always don't ease up.
Yeah, I think it's not so much pushing it. I think it's really about the fact that we need to create more partnership. I think that will really help us move things forward. I hadn't given consideration until the conversation that I've had with all you folks here in about engaging organizations like the Keystone Ag and maybe doing mutual presentations where we're all participating, such as the watersheds, maybe the basin organizations, some of the ag groups, and just trying to deliver that message. We do want to be prepared. I totally agree with your comment about technology and how it's being embraced by today's agricultural world, and it seems like if you're not following it, you're falling behind. When you're seeing things like driverless tractors and all this other stuff, it's just totally amazing. And when you talk about the cost of fertilizers and stuff like that, I never realized on how expensive it was getting until I had a friend of mine who was talking about his good friend who had a load of fertilizer sitting over the side of the road because this truck died out and it was worth like a couple $100,000 or something, and they were worried because the rain was coming. I thought, wow, it just never clicked into my head. So really good points.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's going to take all of us to get through it. That's for sure.
It is. One thing I would like to say is, I know that not all the farm community, this isn't a farm issue, it's an issue for all of us. I know that they're not all given the opportunity to get, retention, but what we can do, and you're right, totally, I give Brian Palliser kudos for the Conservation Trust Fund and the Grove Trust Fund. But, there are those opportunities that the watersheds are pointing out where, we can do maybe larger retention areas and utilize that as feed mechanisms for some of the streams and waterways where maybe they're trying to grab their water from, right? So there's other ways to do it. Like Hank had presented the fact that there were numerous projects available, and maybe you're rating them 1 to 20. It doesn't mean you have to do 1, 2, 3, right? It's the ones you can get at first and keep the other ones going. Certainly benefit. I see a couple of messages up in the text box here. So thanks, Cliff. Thanks. Okay, they're mostly thanks, and I got your message there, Cliff, so I'm good with that. Is there anything anybody would like to say for closing before I do that part?
I'm just grateful for the chance to contribute. Our firm is pretty committed to this new style of water resources engineering, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work in collaboration with you folks. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we couldn't have done it without everybody. That's one thing I will say that we really focused on since I came into the basin, is to create these strong partnerships where we can all share in the success, because it's similar to our Netley Marsh renewal, or it could be regarding this project in LiDAR or our First Nations work. The best way to do it is do it together, because at least we can get it done. Quite often you'll see organizations try to take something on an individual level, and it's very hard to succeed that way. So partnership is a success. Well, I want to thank you, all you fine gentlemen. I didn't get to see you all at the water conference, but it's great to see your faces or hear your voices. And man, I'm looking forward for COVID kind of fading out someday. It's just, dang, when you come from an elected official life to a non-for-profit to COVID to really restrictive on what you do and how you do it, it's amazing. In closing, I'll say that we are looking still at the dates of January 11th to the 13th for our conference, which we're focusing in Grand Forks. I can't tell you for sure if it's going to be in person. We've had a couple of more registrations the last little while, but I don't know if it's enough. Majority of us here in Manitoba are focusing on virtual, being there virtually. I know that Hank is presenting, and he'll be talking further about the work that he's been doing. So I'm looking forward to that. But if you think you're going to be attending at all, please just take a moment to maybe register or send us an email to say, hey, yeah, I'm going, but I'm going to be attending virtually, or I'll be attending in person. We really appreciate it. Putting these types of events on are really difficult for us on an international level, because we're just trying to make happy many different types of personalities. Just going across that line into North Dakota, it's a new day, and then when you go over to Minnesota, they think a lot like Manitobans. So you got a variance of personalities and ideas on how to deal with this stuff. So grateful to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Take care.